The further adventures and expansion of the Punch and Judy factional conflict dynamics. I want to be sure that everyone understands and gets your own kind of slant. I was going to give you some hints to take off some of this on your own about the picture of Punch and Judy, or if you need a later variation, how about Kermit and Miss Piggy? But what we're dealing with is what appears to be two actors, and if you take, and it's not an unfair picturization, that you have apparently two actors, two players, but you've got one manipulator somewhere. That the good old Punch and Judy shows, the way the hand puppets are still done, the little Renaissance, little portable stage, and it opens up here, and you've got a canvas front, and you see the two figures. There's one person back there, and you're dealing with his right hand and his left hand. And the two figures are in what appears to be, or else there would be no entertainment value whatsoever, much less an informative value. There appears to be a conflict, a competition, a drama. Even if it's funny, it is a drama of story. It is another aspect of the absolute necessity for factions, that you cannot even have a drama, which is a form of man's institutions as opposed to the individual man. You can have no drama without two characters, and that includes if it's a one-man show and he's doing a monologue, because his monologue is talking about that which may not be present, but talking about that which is without his own equation. That is, other people, past experiences, and etc. There is no such thing as a one-person story. There is no such thing as a one-person drama. There is no such thing as a solid piece of information. Everything, if it is alive, if it is well, if it is observable, if it attracts anyone's attention, it has the internal factions. But now consider the Punch and Judy dynamic, that there are two figures, and they can hit each other, and they can hug, they can accuse one another. Punch can apparently be dominant for a few minutes for the scene. Judy, of course, submissive, and then they can reverse positions. But you have one operator doing it all. I want you to consider some of the examples that this could represent. Some of them we talked about, but I'll leave it open-ended because they're everywhere. But consider, and I am not inferring for you people who might be getting this on tape, if it's still going out on tape, that I'm referring to gods and spirits and all of that stuff. But just do consider the metaphor that I started out with, that you could be watching a stage drama, a little scenario, a little bit of entertainment of these two hand puppets, dancing together, romancing together, in conflict, arguing, doing everything representative of the human drama. And yet, this is nothing spooky. There's one person behind it all. It's one person's right and left hand doing this. Now, amongst the other things that we have discussed here, would you consider the Punch and Judy dynamic, the factions within something alive? What appears to be the institutions of man being capable of existing apart from those who make them up. Would you consider, in the full sense, everybody knows the good cop, bad cop, don't you? You've seen enough movies. It's just a variation of the Old Testament, stuff date. Variation of Jehovah and Lucifer. Everybody knows that, don't you? You've got a suspect in the room, and you got these two officers going to interrogate the man, and they play good cop, bad cop. As they try to talk to the guy, and the guy doesn't want to admit anything, and this one guy begins to crack his knuckles and begins to take his blackjack and make threatening sounds. And the other guy says, wait a minute, go outside and cool down. And then he tries to be nice to the guy. One of the oldest stories. It's called Good Cop and Bad Cop, at least in Hollywood. It used to be called Punch and Judy. And before that, as I said, it was called by several names, but one of the better-known Western translations, I guess, was Jehovah and Lucifer. Good cop, bad cop. Hey, kid, straighten out or we'll just beat the crap out of you. We'll take you downstairs. I know how to hit you and it won't show a thing. And you'll have a kidney that's going to be about as popular to you as a damn driver of a wrecker service on the weekend. I'll work you over plenty good. And the good cop, the good gods say, wait a minute, go out and cool down. We can't treat this boy that way. And he says, hey, I don't know how long I can hold him off of you. You know how bad cops are. You know how evil forces are. You know, I'll do my best, but you know, cigarette here. You want to drink? Here, I'll call my sister over to entertain you. It might be better if you went ahead. I don't know. I'm going to tell you the truth. I know that guy, and if it was me, I'd tell him something. Or consider, in fact, what we're talking about, the dominant and submissive dance that appears to be, and consider rulers and the people. It appears to be two separate things. It appears to be as wide a gap as you could ask for down in the city and external affairs, from the ruling powers to the peons. All of us serfs and fiefs. Not Barney, but there would appear to be an insurmountable chasm between the ruling powers throughout city life and those that they rule. But if you think again of this scenario, you got one hand up the skirts of the king and the other hand up the skirts of all the people. The king can threaten, he can run at them, they run back, and they may even begin to growl like, maybe we should start a revolution. They begin to creep up and mumble. The king backs off, and you got one operator. Consider how about the conscious and the unconscious mind? Since that's now a reality in this part of the world. Instead of me trying to get you to see that there is possible, up on the hillside somewhere, more specific, more precise descriptions of the operations of the human nervous system, to say the what, least. Then the conscious and the unconscious mind. But in the city it is now a fait accompli, intellectually. So let's assume it exists in the same way that good cop and bad cop, same way that Jehovah and Lucifer works. But consider, you got conscious mind over here, trying to do the whatever I'm supposed to do, according to Uncle Siggy. And over here you got the unconscious mind, and all of its nefarious, less than well understood motivations. But consider, is one operator, even over here in this murky, dark area, that it's still one guy down there doing it all. And if he's even doing this, the unconscious mind, in this case Judy unconscious, and over here Punch conscious mind, that even if he makes the unconscious mind live up to its reputation of being very symbolic, oblique, vague, mysterious, even if it's doing that, do understand it's the same person operating that, the unconscious, as it is the conscious. Or consider, to use some of my descriptions, my maps, consider the city life and the revolutionist life. Well, we better pass over that one right quick. How about consider the two aspects that we were discussing last tape? The silent and the speakable. How about the attempt, the variation that I was trying to get you to see of how life is wired up for people to accept, to think about man's institutions as being able to live apart from, to exist apart from those who make them up. Then a variation of that thought and the thinker, that thoughts can exist outside of thinker. Punch and Judy goes on, the way it appears in the city, the way it's accepted, that there are such things as thoughts, ideas, that actually exist. In some way, you just can't put your hands on them, but by God, they exist outside the thinker. There it is. What if it's true? Of course, if you got any sort of eyesight, you realize what I was trying to point toward. That is, it is less than a telling description. But even if it were true, consider this. We're still dealing with Punch and Judy. Yes, This hand represents thoughts. Great, metaphysical, mystical, religious, moral, obscure, cosmic thoughts. And this represents people. The thoughts, ideas of goodness and what you should do, what the truth is. The truth is not dependent upon some sucker's subjective opinion. That's what the thoughts over here say. Of course, the guy running this, if you're really going to pay Punch and Judy, he can not only have these two going, he can be his own voice off stage. Like his own voiceover. The puppets can, the hand puppets can be sitting there still so that you know they're not supposed to be talking. And down there he tried to change his voice and he says, and as human life, human intelligence believes, thoughts can exist apart from a thinker to think it. That the real thoughts, the meaningful ideas of human life, human existence, are not dependent upon the subjective existence of a person to think the thought. And so his voice can be like representing. And then he can physically make, like, here's thoughts. And over here's the potential of somebody to think. But it's not necessary because here it is. This hand is representing thoughts by themselves. So there it is. There's your proof. Except if you can look behind there, I'll remind you again, it's this one guy, parabolically speaking, it's one operator down there, and the two hands are connected to the same trunk. Well, how about consider the illusion of unity and the reality of factionalism? But I was going to say, especially tonight, I'll get to it in a second, to consider, last time we were fooling around, of how secondary activities, things in the city, I think I tried to get you to ease up on it to begin with and said that many or most things in the city, secondary activities, require an audience. So now consider the audience and the performer. Not just down to the level of individuals of the dominant and submissive dancer of every two-person relationship, not just Punch and Judy, because the guy operating can make it represent anything he wants to. So now, Judy, the left hand, represents, in quotation marks of course, or between your fingers doing that, whichever it is. This represents the performer. And this represents the audience. And in the context, of course, as with any drama, you can look at it as being a kind of competition, a kind of struggle between the audience and the performer. That no matter what the performer seems to be up to, whether he seems to be making a political speech, whether he seems to be speaking on matters religious, or whether he seems to be a comedian, he not only needs an audience, he needs to convert them. He needs to win them over. And when the temperature in Sagittarius is in a Mercury, when everything's just right, the audience wants to be won over. They want to dance backwards. They want to be converted. Unless they were drugged in off the street. If they paid their money, or if they came in free but went to all the trouble to take a shower and came in to hear a sermon, a speech, a comedy routine, they want to be won over. They want to be converted. Before I get into what I was going to really try to get you to look at concerning that, some of the examples I mentioned, I can't resist. I'm going to have to go back for a second. Concerning the aspect that things under ordinary conditions are arranged in such a way that men do not many times even distinguish between the institutional life of man and an individual life. And for those of you on tape, institutional life, I mean in the broadest possible sense, anything that seems to require the collection of man, which is everything, except the life of a hermit, and that is of no consequence. But it is the full operations of man, everything that goes on in civilization, from religion to education to the military to politics to the world of academia, everything. And how it is that things are wired up in the human nervous system so that without any analyzation, it is accepted, without even talking about it, that the institutions in some way can exist apart from the people who make them up, such as I was saying that there is no such thing as the church, the Catholic Church, without Catholics. The buildings are not it, the name's not it, all of the vestments, all of the accoutrements, I don't know what they call them in the church, but all the stuff in the buildings, the altars, the candles, that's not the church. The church does not exist without the people, and that is not taken into consideration, although under a very short time period I could get ordinary intelligence, I'm sure, to go, well, yeah, I know what you mean, so what? So what? What? But what I specifically wanted you to consider a little bit more was when we're dealing, if you look at it this way, that you're dealing with the way things are wired up, that ordinary intelligence will accept, looking at the Punch and Judy show, will accept that institutions can exist, without any doubt, can exist apart from those who make them up. One of the things this does, there is no ordinary description for it, but here it is. It fuzzes up the question about who's responsible. It almost puts a little white out on it. It almost turns the fine-tuning knob a little off-center. Because as long as the intellect will accept, without analyzation, because it cannot even analyze it at the normal city level, sequential, in a sequential manner, because it won't hold up. Like I said, because I could get ordinary people to say, yeah, you're right, Harvard doesn't really exist, except for people who make up Harvard. Yeah, so what? It's great. Because it is then accepted without any analyzation, remember, because it won't even hold up for a second. That institution can over here exist on the left hand, and the people. And of course, at times, the people go into the school. The Presbyterians go into the Presbyterian church. And so they can commingle. But they can also do this, as witnessed by the fact I just did it. All right, here we've got the full population of all the Muslims in the world, and here we have the institution of Islam. Now, they're two different things. I mean, they can merge, and obviously by definition, Muslims are inside of the Islamic religion. But 4 or 5 Muslims can die today, or they can be converted over to being a moose or a civitan, and Islam survives, because Islam's not dependent upon whether we've got 45 million, 60 million. It all sounds right. But you can't say that Islam exists if it had no million, if it had 0 people. As long as the human nervous system is wired up in such a way that even the educated, those at the cutting edge of civilization, without any analyzation, will accept that institutions can exist and do exist. Apart from those who make it up, you have then blurred, that's not the intention from the ordinary view down the city, but you have blurred, you have about first story eradicated, all in quotation marks, any meaningful inquiry, any profitable question as to who's responsible. Let's see if you've already forgotten. How about, here it is, April 1990, and what just happened, that the spokesman for the USSR admitted that certain atrocities that had been blamed on another country are now admitted to have taken place under those harsh days, under those times of Stalinism. Now you, in a sense now, in the city, for you people on tape, this is not an attack on anybody. This has nothing to do with blame. It has to do with the way that energy flows. That from one view, historically, if we were taking an ordinary city view, that the participants, in this case the rulers and the people indirectly of the USSR, have now had their cake and ate it both. That is, we are sort of not going to any longer say that we didn't have, that we weren't even around. We're not going to say that we were out of town when this happened. Because, sad to say, now that we will admit certain things historically, that is the kind of really unsuitable actions that took place under Stalinism. We got a Stalinism. We got the Presbyterian Church. We got Islam. We got the Democratic Party. We've got the Restoration. We've got Cromwell's reign. But it's never Cromwell. It's not just Joseph Stalin. It's not just whoever established, who was it? The Presbyterian Church. Knox. It's not just them. It's an ism. It's an institutional problem. That yes, this sort of thing did happen back during WW2 under those very unfortunate days of Stalinism. And other sophisticated world leaders and other people, just ordinary citizens, another place to go. Yeah. Well, how about the unfortunate things that occurred at a certain period having to do with Catholicism? The Inquisition. But was it anybody's fault? Well, Cardinal Fang maybe. But was it anybody's really fault? It was just an unfortunate period. Like Stalinism. The Inquisition. The Inquisition is an institution. You understand? It's not a building, but it's not an individual. It's what I'm trying to get you to consider when I'm using the term institutional. As long as it's not an individual, that everyone involved, the vast majority, which will end up being everyone, that everyone involved says it was his fault. Then if it was, then you would have a whole chapter or a subchapter in your history book regarding Cardinal Fang. But it's not Cardinal Fang. They'll mention a few people that was there. Whatever his name was. Takamara. They'll mention a few of these guys. And a prince here and there and a king here or there that said, yeah, go sick them. I don't care. But there is no one person responsible. The institution is responsible. In this case, the institution being the Inquisition. Do you see that you have first story blurred beyond any meaningful inquiry into who's responsible? Who's in charge here? Punch can ask Judy, who's in charge here? Judy can look off. She can look back at Punch like, you idiot. There's nobody here but you and I. Or if it was really fancy, this would confuse the people when they used to watch Punch and Judy. Punch could ask Judy, who's in charge here? They could look at each other and look off, and then both of them kind of look down, like they were looking down in there. I sure hope that didn't happen back. Maybe that did. Maybe that's what brought on the Dark Ages. Well, no matter. As long as I was taking a sidetrack, how about a little even further sidetrack? Still related to institutions do not really exist apart from those who make them up. A little bit further, institutions do not exist, of course, not only apart from the people who make them up, but the behavior of the people who make them up. Is anybody going to say, well, boy, that is so obvious that makes my head hurt? The institution cannot exist, cannot even be seen. It just simply does not exist, not only apart from the people who make it up, because the people can't just make it up. You can't just suddenly have a big old herd of people and you say, these are all Catholics. Take my word for it. There they are. And they all stand. Yep. And perhaps every time you look, they're all still standing there. Hundreds of thousands. You say, that's it. That is the institution of the church, the Roman Catholic Church. You do understand that nobody would remember that. It would not be alive. It would not even make history. We wouldn't even know the term. It would have been like a boulder that rolled down a hill one day and somebody looked at it and says, God, that strikes me as being like the institution of Colorado. You would have never heard of it. The people who make it up have got to do a certain thing. They've got to behave. I'm inclined to ask if anybody is ready for this. Consider that I, everybody's I, doesn't exist apart from somebody to behave in its name. Yeah, but down the city that couldn't be true. That's some sort of... I almost slipped that in on them, didn't I? Well, because human nervous system is now wired up in such a way that if it indeed heard what I said, and I can make it a little more obvious if it wasn't, it would say, no, 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 no. And what it's saying, before I try to make it a little more obvious, is saying the same thing without knowing it. That, wait a minute, the church, an institution can't exist apart. A thought can exist apart from people. My I, that is my sense, my individuality, what I am, me being a living, thinking, 1990 human being, alive, conscious, thinking, feeling, the full internal components, the full components and operations of a human. I'm not simply my behavior. And there is no way to reasonably, logically, sequentially, if I was dumb enough, to try and disprove that. But it will not stand up to analyzation. If that's true, then how can it be proven, I could ask them. How do you know that you exist apart from your behavior? And you can't. And I could even push that, I'm not going to, and I could push in the same way ordinary people in the city, many people, and get them to go, yeah, I see what you mean, but, so what? Because they can't deal with it. There's no need to deal with it. But I was going to suggest to you that the institution of I, everyone's individuality, in no wise can exist apart from somebody to behave in its name. For something, for some energy to pass through you and you behave in its name. Consider the alternative. Consider in some way, I'm really playing with reality, but that here you are and that you're 21 years old, and now you sit somewhere, you've got a name, you've got a haircut, and you've got clothes on, and you don't behave. There's no behavior on you. You're just an individual version of my hundreds of thousands of people staying out there on that plane, and they're all staying there, and I say, there is Islam. There, at my last count, is 45 million, some odd, Muslims, and they all stand. You look a year later, an hour later, and they're all just like they were. No behavior at all. In reality, other than their material presence, but in reality, the institution then, that is, what appears to be the collection of them, and then some, the institution of Islam, or anything else, does not exist. You would be an individual, I suggest to you, variation of that, if there you stood, and you did not ever behave. No behavior. And I could get some people's ordinary intellect to go, well, all right, with Jesus, so what? Again, I'd have to say, if I was still so dumb, I'd have to go, so what? So what? You don't realize that the institution of I, of a person's individuality, does not really exist apart from something, someone, some form of energy to behave in its name. Well, I asked if you were ready for it. I guess we got the answer, didn't we? One more little one. We hit this the other night, and I'm not sure everybody got it. I'm in the same ballpark. It has to do again with the blurring of any question of who's responsible. And it's always back to the question of free will, whether it's put that way or not. Am I free in what I just did, or am I a victim of fate, circumstances, uncontrollable forces, and are the other people, the institutions, the individuals with whom I'm in competition, with whom I'm trying to dance, what they just did to me? Were they free? Did they know what they were doing? Should I mitigate my reaction to what they did? Were they pushed? Was chance and accident raining on their parade also? Within that, I was pointing out to you, trying to get you to see, there is a kind of institutional reference made to evil of all sorts, not just religious, but all inhumane, untoward, uncivilized actions, evil. And it's a kind of institutionalized evil, and it serves as a kind of blurring again as to who's responsible. Now, I used several examples, if you recall, and I tried to warn you not to get involved with the specific examples. But the thing about the verbal attempts to define and to separate institutional evil from people is, it becomes, for any revolutionary purpose, it becomes redundant times two. It is a non-processing view to accept institutionalized evil, negative actions, unprofitable actions, as being able to exist apart from somebody. And I wanted you to try and seriously consider when I said the verbal attempts, because they're all verbal, but I was going to get into what appears to be the potency of words anyway, concerning a performer and an audience. But it's to consider what words are doing with the attempt to define, to point to isolate institutional evil, and then without any analyzation to accept that it in some way can exist apart from people who make it up. For instance, one of our more common ones now is somebody will be speaking, a minister, a social commentator, an upright member of the community, well thought of person will be saying, we have got to do something. The scourge of drugs, alcohol, specifically, this alcohol, the scourge of alcohol is ruining our community, is destroying our society. And the speaker would not hesitate, perhaps as soon as he got through saying this, in large segments of the city agree when he says this. And after it's over, they have a cocktail hour. And he will not deny that he's a social drinker. So what is he attacking? What is life through this man attacking? Now it said alcohol, the scourge that is destroying our city. But if I jumped out right quick in a nice voice, and there it is, 5 minutes later, they're having a reception, and he's having a martini. And I said, well, you're having a martini. And I did in a non-accusative voice. He said, well, yeah, I'm a social drinker. Now if I said, well, wait. Of course, you know I'm talking to him, I'm talking to you people. Life is not talking about alcohol. In this sense, alcohol would be the institution, the scourge of alcoholism. It's not the alcohol, because he admits he drinks. No, you're right. It's not the alcohol. That's the word, though. That's the exact word. That's the word that had the crowd go, Of course, that's not strong enough for you. The scourge of drugs. And the crowd goes, The scourge of things that change the brain chemistry. And if I ask him later, there at the cocktail party, I said, well, do you take drugs, cocaine and stuff? Oh, heavens no. But you do have a drink. Oh, yeah. But you do know drugs and alcohol. Oh, sure, I knew what I was saying. Then is life actually talking about alcohol? The institution of alcohol. He's talking about people, certain people, not him. And let's assume he's correct. It doesn't seem to affect him in some negative way in his life. But he's talking about people, certain people who drink alcohol. God, I'm afraid you missed it again. Back to what sends the shivers through the city, through history. And if it wasn't alcohol, it could be something else. Blasphemy, the Reformation, drifting away from religion, being immoral. But they're all institutionalized. That the man says, the president will say, the scourge of drugs and alcohol is wrecking, is tearing at the very fabric of our country. And last I heard, our president admits to being a social drinker. And so he's not talking about alcohol. And you could get him to say, or a reasonable man to go, well, yeah, you're right, it's not alcohol, it's, certain people. So what? And he'd look off, and it's gone again. Because he'd turn right around and still be talking to people, and somebody'd say, well, what are we doing, Mr. President, or the minister, or whoever it was that made the statement originally? What are we trying to do here in our local community to fight this scourge? Well, we have such and such plans involved, we're involved with this. And if I jumped back again, was dumb enough, and I said, wait a minute, it was just a second ago I got you to see, it's not alcohol, it's people. Oh yeah, I know that, but... And that's as far as it goes. The scourge is people. The scourge is not alcohol. The scourge is not blasphemy. The scourge is not hypocrisy. The scourge is not immorality. But notice, as long as there's the appearance in the human nervous system, it's not just this, but I'm going to do it tonight, the appearance that over here is the scourge of alcoholism, and over here is the kind of people who can recognize that scourge and say something about it and try to do something about it. Play Punch and Judy, go here and beat it on the head. There is no head over here apart from people. Well, we're not talking about actual people. We're talking about the curse of Stalinism, the scourge of drugs. No, you're not. The scourge is people. I'm just using their terms. The curse is people. But notice, you have taken away any meaningful inquiry from a certain view. It's not an attack, it doesn't matter down the city, but you've taken away any possible revolutionary new process of information to be available as long as you have no clear picture of what you're asking. You're attacking that, which amounts to not only a stalking horse, but a shadowy stalking horse. One more back up. Jesus. My asides are already taken over. One more little bit, though. After having said all that, how would you like to have a new, up on the hillside somewhere, revolutionary rule, axiom, dictum, proposal, suggestion, now I make it rule, regarding such affairs as this? That is, when institutions are operating at peak efficiency in the city, they are hardly, sometimes not at all, noticed. That's when they're efficient. Or if they're ever noticed by somebody here and there, they're immediately forgotten in the same way I was saying that I get somebody to go, well, you're right, it's not alcohol, it's people who drink alcohol, so what? But the institutions of man, those that survive, those that seem to have some impact on history, in the past, even now, those things are always operating at such peak efficiency. I'm going to give you, the spectrum is very short. It's all the way from hardly noticed to not noticed at all. Now I was going to get back where I started to, into the tangibility of talk itself and the power of words. And specifically having to do with where I was showing you what appears to be a performer and an audience. Right. The performer, in the civilized sense, which is dealing always with secondary matters, has got to talk, or we would not even be discussing the situation. So what the performer says, what Prince says to Judy, the words are very important. I mean, that's the power in the words, right? Well, that's the way some philosophers talk in South Carolina, by the way. They go, well, at least the better ones. Those are not in jail. The words are important, but if we're going to get into the humanity aspect of it, then what is the most important thing outside the words themselves? It shouldn't be a multiple choice. The answer should be, well, the speaker, somebody to say the words, because somebody's got to say the words. Or we're back to that operational illusion, in a sense, that flawed reflection in the city that thought and thinkers can exist apart, that words in some way can exist without somebody to say them. And we know that's not true, so what, other than the words themselves, what is the most important thing? Someone to say them. Are you sure? You mean we could just have punch? The power of words, the power of someone to say certain words. The power exists only when there is an audience. Would you like to attempt to see that which is not normally considered? What if you had, historically, words are considered very powerful when they seem to have been a part of some upheaval, some demagogue, or some religious leader in a more positive sense. But what if you had, let's just jump into history and make up a scenario. You've got over here this one fanatic, this guy talking all sorts of insanity. And you, if you listen to the words, you might have thought, boy, that's the kind of thing that could inflame people, or that, you know, that's just, it's uncivilized, it is unprofitable. But no one's listening to him. You have not only a fanatic over here, but you've got a pathetic fanatic. If no one's listening, if he has no reactive listeners, that is, no real audience, nothing happens. Now, let's jump forward in ordinary horizontal time in my scenario. Let's say it's a few months, few years later, and he has in some way gained an audience, that he now has what, by just ordinary definitions, are becoming a faithful band of followers. He then begins to be seen as a quite real danger. It's the same man saying the same stuff. What happened? Don't fall into the first story trap and say, well, that's obvious. No, it's not. You're not wired up. The intellect's not wired up to consider that. And you can believe either if we're talking about a negative, apparent negative aspect in history of some real fanatic or demagogue somewhere, or if it appeared to be something serious, of some religious, some prophet, some philosopher. And that he could be observed at some time, which would have been true, that there he is saying his words, apparently. And outside people, observers could listen in and say, well, these words have certain power. I mean, they strike me as being potentially dangerous. So you might hear, maybe not dangerous in a political sense, but these are inflammatory and disruptive to the status of our morality or our religious beliefs and rituals. But if it says one guy talking, you'll never hear of him. He will not make the history books because he's not really dangerous. He ends at that time. The end result would be, I was suggesting, a fitting epithet to him would be, even if he was alive, would be pathetic. I mean, the guy's nuts, and those ideas, if they in fact had any widespread currency here in our city, it could cause trouble. That sort of thing that is not civilized. But if no one's listening, nothing happens. Is it the words were important? Well, obviously not. Was the man important? Well, you should be past that to begin with. But here it is, 6 months later, a year later, and now there is widespread concern over this man and what he is saying. Why? Well, I don't know, it's kind of spreading around. I don't know, he's just getting to be a danger. Yeah, but why? Didn't you observe him? Didn't you mention him to me about a year ago? Yeah, that's right. Some of us are laughing. I mean, he was on a street corner talking like that. Well, what's different now? I mean, how's the story changed? What's the same crowd? Well, why is he a danger now? Well, don't be an idiot. I just told you he's got people now interested. You don't hear it? You think that the speaker is important? You think Punch can put on the Punch and Judy show by himself? Or Judy can put it on by herself? Not hardly. No one is built to ever consider. I'll just put it to you directly in case some of you think you miss it, in case I wonder that some of you are missing it. The audience to the words are absolutely as important as the performer. There is no power in any words without an audience. How about you people from the Star and Cross backgrounds from the good Old Testament? Until Jehovah had created some people, he couldn't say, I am the Word. The Word was me. If there's nobody to hear it, he'd been worse than the Zen tree. He could have hollered that out forever and fell over and over and over in the forest, and he wouldn't know whether he exists or not. That my word is the ultimate power. That may be, but only if there's someone to hear it. Now, can you get past all of those kind of three-dimensional flawed quantitative judgments, such as man and gods, and realize that if the words of the gods were important, do you understand that man then would be just as important, because the audience is absolutely undeniable, there's no way out, as important in the matter of the power of words, which is not in question. They have power, but they do not have a power without an audience. And the first thing that the intellect would think is, well, no, all you need is the words have power themselves. But then you've got to have somebody to say them, of course, because if somebody didn't say them one way or the other, like write them or speak them, if somebody didn't say them, then the power would just be inchoate. We would never know that the words were there. Somebody's got to say it. That's the important thing. Or if it's a negative aspect, that was the thing that should have been stopped. No, it wasn't. Somebody saying anything has no power whatsoever. There is no potency to that. The performer is nothing. I don't care whether it's Mick Jagger, Jesus, Moses, Cardinal Fang. There is no power without an audience. The audience is not a secondary affair. The audience is not latecomers. The audience is not something that somebody thought, well, that'd be nice. To hell with nice. There is no power in words, which there are power in words. There are no power in words no matter who's speaking, unless there's an audience. Would you like to consider a bit further why this might be, or any way to look at it, besides any sort of crude attempt, if anybody was following it, an ordinary person, thinking it had some sort of psychological ramifications or implications? How about I put it to you this way, that you have completed, when this happens, you have completed the Punch and Judy show. You have presented a full-fledged dance team. You have, on a much more expansive level, what you have done is affected the completion of an energy loop. Because if the words went out, if the energy went in that direction, and there was no completion of at least a link in the verbal food chain, that is, completed the link, that is, the words were said by someone, but there was no audience to hear them, there would be no effect because the energy would not have completed a loop. There would be no transfer, in this case apparently, of information, but what it amounts to, there would be no transfer of energy. It would be, as it were, grounded out, thrown into infinite space. Radio signals sent out in a direction in which there are no receivers. It would be energy, of course, not lost within what apparently is a closed system, but energy unrealized in its potential. That the words were said with no audience, it has no power. And I'll ask you one more time to try and consider that the obvious won't get it, of saying, well, sure. It's not well, sure. If you'd like to consider a little deeper, how about the implications internally in the forced dialogue of you talking to you? There seems to be in the human nervous system, under ordinary conditions, there seems to be real power in such areas your forefathers believed, in the areas that were considered religious or moralistic. And people nowadays, probably in most Western cities, would think of it more on a psychological basis. But there is this forced conversation, this dialogue going on internally to you, in which you apparently hear voices. I know you think it's you, but remember, there's got to be somebody speaking for you, or you wouldn't exist. Somebody's in there operating and behaving. And so there are voices like, well, I should do so-and-so. I should work harder. I should exercise more. I should be nicer to my fellow man. I should be more charitable. And what happens? Is there an audience for all of this? Is there reactive listeners to what you say? Would they have any power were there not anyone to hear it? Do they have any power if there's not anyone? Remember, not just an audience. You've got to win the audience over. The variation I was giving you was a reactive audience. That there seems to be a real interplay. It's not just Punch up here. Imagine that's his nose and his face looking this way, and him making comments about, well, I should be much more concerned about my fellow man, and Judy's looking off this way and doesn't move. And he keeps talking about all the things we should do. That is, considering now that we're talking about one human nervous system, and it keeps talking, we should do this, we should do that. And Judy, as it were, is now her own individual version of that institutionalized picture I gave you of 45 million people staying out there not moving, representing some institution. humanism, civilization, and they don't move. They do not behave. They are not a real reactive audience. The apparent speaker has not won them over. In the case of me saying, or somebody saying, hey, institutions and people may or may not be the same thing, because here is the institution of Islam, these 45 million people. Take it, people, show them. And these 45 million dudes and dudettes just stand there. They do not fit the definition of an audience, as I'm telling you. Or at least the person describing has not won them over to say these people make up Islam, and suddenly they all go, yeah, all right, yeah, okay. That's us. They don't do anything. That is no audience. I guess it was sticky enough for 55 minutes, wasn't it? How about go out on easy ones? How about this? All Punch and Judy's, all dances, the factionalism and everything you can see quite easily with no ordinary negative connotations to it, but you can see everything as a form of competition. Romance, friendship, always the performer and an audience. And they can be changing places just instantaneously, but the performer is attempting to win over the audience. It's a form of competition. Doesn't have to be a blood sport, but it's a form of competition. Now you win over the audience, whether you convert them to a religious belief or political view, or you just made them laugh, or you made them apparently like you, then you had won. And I was going to point out in the city, what is the first thing in all competitions that they expect the winner to do? What's the first thing all winners do? Talk. They make a speech. That's the first thing. Here, this man started a religion, and they killed him and chopped him up and fed him to the dogs, and look, he's back. And sure enough, there he is, prophet so-and-so. And what's the first thing he does? He doesn't do a tap dance. He doesn't fly a kite. They say, here he is. People go, my God. What's the first thing they expect? He won. He beat death. Or, of course, obviously in sports, this man won the tennis match. This man won the golf tourney. This man won the election. And he comes on camera and says, here he is. And an audience goes, yeah. They could be supporters. They could just be, and he's announced as the winner. And what do you expect him to do? He's not going to come and do card tricks. He's not going to do a mime act. Nobody even thinks about it. There's one thing immediately expected of whoever wins the competition. The audience or the performer. Whoever wins, one thing's immediately expected. You don't even talk about it. You just stand back because you know he's going to take the mic. Everybody expects he's going to talk. You don't see any connection? I thought we'd go out easy. Well, you could look at it, by the way, whatever the competition apparently was, that by the winner talking, he has or she has closed up on a certain level an energy loop. The contest is over. This is the end of this year's Masters Golf Tournament. And it's sort of officially over when the winner comes up and says a few words. It was a great match. Saw a lot of my old friends. It was tight. Nicholas was breathing down my back. The weather was great, but it's lucky. I just thank my family and God and everybody that I won, and see you next year. Then it's official, in a sense. It's institutionalized closing of the contest. Once the winner says something, you don't see any connection between that and internally. What is it people try to do when they enter a forced conversation and dialogue with themselves when somebody apparently has won something? What's the first thing you want to do is tell somebody, hey, I hadn't had a drink in 2 days. I hadn't had a cigarette in 4 hours. Oh, I've been charitable. I've been charitable now. Well, I'll put it another way. I haven't been to myself hating my fellow man. Jesus, it's been almost, 45 minutes. It's like a very feeble attempt based upon what I'm describing as being an institutionalized reality of it in the city, the ordinary level, of attempting to close up the loop. That if I announce I'm the winner, I am the winner. That'll be the end of it. I'll leave it to you people who have been in the city before. Does that always work? That Punch tells Judy, hey, I quit smoking. And Judy says, Really? I saw you smoking this morning. Oh, I quit since then. Maybe Judy looks off and Punch looks off. But remember, it's one guy. And the one guy, the one operator, is a smoker and a non-smoker, a drinker and a non-drinker. He is the dominant and the submissive. He's the good cop and the bad cop. He is the audience and he is the performer. Where are you going to go? I started to say, who are you going to call? I was afraid some of you... Judy Buster. Well, I guess if tapes could talk, and future history, if anybody ever sees these tapes could talk, I guess in response to me saying, well, the old clock says we're about out of time, that the tape, the camcorder, and the little microphone might go, at least notice this. I didn't try and really force you in some way to be won over. And since we're here at the end of the tape, I am not going to operate on the basis that it was a contest and I was trying to convert you and that I won. Because if I had, I'd have something to say, see, here at the end. And I don't.